Hello everybody and welcome once again to Jevv's Storytime, which is the unofficial title here, I suppose. Just opening up my book. So, how has your weekend been? It's Monday here, Monday afternoon, so I've completed my weekend. We're into the work week. I have been busy doing work stuff this morning. I shall be doing more again this afternoon when I finish reading to you, namely putting product photos online and product photos and descriptions online for our business. So what we're currently reading is The Railway Children by Edith Nesbit. She wrote quite a number of children's stories, Victorian era, I think, but they're imaginative stories about things that children could easily imagine doing themselves, and sometimes they stretch the ideas a little bit further with some rather fantasy ideas as well. This one isn't particularly that way. It's more just children coping with a different lifestyle to what they're used to and how they make fun for themselves and what comes of it. So I will stop talking about it and get reading. I do hope you have your drinking water handy and your snacks, and you've got a nice comfy seat, maybe a snuggly blanket if you're somewhere cold, like somewhere in the southern hemisphere because it's winter down here, or somewhere nice and cool if you're in the northern hemisphere and it's sweltering hot summer where you are. Sorry about the bump, that's me just bumping my desk and everything wobbles. So I shall carry on with reading. We are reading The Railway Children by E. Nesbit, and we are reading Chapter 5, Prisoners and Captives. There you go, Prisoners and Captives. In the last chapter, Peter's little toy engine had been fixed because Bobby had found somebody who was able to do that for her. So she was able to gift that to him, getting it done. So Chapter 5, Prisoners and Captives. It was one day when Mother had gone to Maidbridge, which I think is a made-up place, but that doesn't matter, to Maidbridge. She had gone alone, but the children were to go to the station to meet her, and loving the station as they did, it was only natural that they should be there for a good hour before there was any chance of Mother's train arriving, even if the train was punctual, which was most unlikely. Obviously, this train has a history of being late. No doubt they would have been just as early even if it had been a fine day and all the delights of woods and fields and rocks and rivers had been open to them. But it happened to be a very wet day, and for July, very cold. The book is set in England, so it's meant to be summertime. There was a wild wind that drove flocks of dark purple clouds across the sky, like herds of dream elephants, as Phyllis said, and the rain stung sharply, so that the way to the station was finished at a run. Then the rain fell faster and harder and beat slantwise against the windows of the booking office and of the chill place that had general waiting room on its door. It was usually just a big open space with maybe some hard wooden seats in it for waiting for your train. It's like being in a besieged castle, Phyllis said. Look at the arrows of the foe striking against the battlements. It's much more like a great garden squirt, said Peter. They decided to wait on the upside, for the down platform looked very wet indeed. And the rain was driving right into the little bleak shelter where the down passengers have to wait for their trains, because there's two sides to the platform. Coming through the station, there are two lines. The line so that the trains going up to London can pass the trains coming down from London. They just read that bit. That the hour would be full of incident and of interest, for there would be 2 up trains and 1 down to look at before the one that should bring Mother back. Perhaps it'll have stopped raining by then, said Bobby. Anyhow, I'm glad I brought Mother's waterproof and umbrella. They went into the desert spot labelled General Waiting Room, and the time passed pleasantly enough in a game of advertisements. You know the game, of course. It's something like Dumb Crambo, another old-fashioned game. The players take it in turns to go out and then come back and look as like some advertisement, as they can, and the others have to guess what advertisement it is meant to be. Bobby came in and sat down under Mother's umbrella and made a sharp face, and everyone knew she was the fox who sits under the umbrella in the advertisement. Phyllis tried to make a magic carpet of Mother's waterproof, but it would not stand out stiff and raft-like as a magic carpet should, and nobody could guess it. Everyone thought Peter was carrying things a little too far when he blacked his face all over with coal dust and struck a spidery attitude and said he was the blot that advertises somebody's blue-black writing fluid. So these are all poster advertisements that they would have seen around the place, which when this story was written would have been recognisable to all the children who were listening to it, but we don't recognise them anymore unless we are used to things from that era, if we've seen lots of them, which I haven't seen these ones. Different advertisements in New Zealand to what they have in England. It was Phyllis's turn again, and she was trying to look like the Sphinx that advertises what's-his-name's personally conducted tours up the Nile, when the sharp ting of the signal announced the up train. The children rushed out to see it pass. On its engine were the particular driver and fireman who were now numbered among the children's dearest friends. Courtesies passed between them. Jim asked after the toy engine, and Bobby pressed on his acceptance a moist, greasy package of toffee that she had made herself, as a thank you, I think. Charmed by this attention, the engine driver consented to consider her request that some day he should take Peter for a ride on the engine. "Stand back, mates!" cried the engine driver suddenly, "and off she goes!" And sure enough, off the train went. The children watched the tail lights of the train till it disappeared round the curve of the line, and then turned to go back to the dusty freedom of the general waiting room and the joys of the advertisement game. They expected to see just one or two people, the end of the procession of passengers who had given up their tickets and gone away. Instead, the platform round the door of the station had a dark blot around it, and the dark blot was a crowd of people. "Oh," said Peter, with a thrill of joyous excitement, "something's happened. Come on." Sorry, I'm just looking at something that's on here. Just wondering what's going on with it. Carrying on. I think I just shut something, turned something off. Bother. Anyway. They ran down the platform. When they got to the crowd, they could, of course, see nothing but the damp black backs and elbows of people on the crowds outside. Everybody was talking at once. It was evident that something had happened. "It's my belief he's nothing worse than a natural," said a farmerish-looking person. Peter saw his red, clean-shaven face as he spoke. "If you asked me, I should say it was a police court case," said a young man with a black bag. "Not it, the infirmary more like." Then the voice of the station master was heard, firm and official. "Now then, move along there. I'll attend to this, if you please." But the crowd did not move. And then came a voice that thrilled the children through and through, for it spoke in a foreign language, and what is more, it was a language that they had never heard. They had heard French spoken and German. Aunt Emma knew German and used to sing a song about Bedeuten and Zayten and Bin and Sin. Nor was it Latin. Peter had been in Latin for 4 terms. It was some comfort, anyhow, to find that none of the crowd understood the foreign language any better than the children did. "What's that he's saying?" asked the farmer heavily. "Sounds like French to me," said the station master, who had once been to Boulogne for a day. "It isn't French," cried Peter. "What is it then?" asked more than one voice. The crowd fell back a little to see who had spoken, and Peter pressed forward so that when the crowd closed up again, he was in the front rank. "I don't know what it is," said Peter, "but it isn't French. I know that." Then he saw what it was that the crowd had for its centre. It was a man. The man, Peter did not doubt, who had spoken in that strange tongue. a man with long hair and wild eyes, with shabby clothes of a cut Peter had not seen before, a man whose hands and lips trembled and who spoke again as his eyes fell on Peter. "No, it's not French," said Peter. "Try him with French if you know so much about it," said the farmer man. "Parlez-vous français?" began Peter boldly, and the next moment the crowd recoiled again, for the man with the wild eyes had left leaning against the wall and had sprung forward and caught Peter's hands and begun to pour forth a flood of words which, though he could not understand a word of them, Peter knew the sound of. "There," said he, and turned, his hands still clasped in the hands of the strange shabby figure, to throw a glance of triumph at the crowd. "There, that's French." "What does he say?" "I don't know." Peter was obliged to own it. "Here," said the station master again, "you move on if you please. I'll deal with this case." A few of the more timid or less inquisitive ones moved slowly and reluctantly away, and Phyllis and Bobby got near to Peter. All three had been taught French at school. How deeply they now wished that they had learned it. That's quite a difference, being taught and having learned. Peter shook his head at the stranger, but he also shook his hands as warmly and looked at him as kindly as he could. A person in the crowd, after some hesitation, said suddenly, "No comprenez," and then, blushing deeply, backed out of the press and went away. "Take him into your room," whispered Bobby to the station master. "Mother can talk French. She'll be here by the next train from Maidbridge." The station master took the arm of the stranger, suddenly but not unkindly, but the man wrenched his arm away and cowered back, coughing and trembling, and trying to push the station master away. "Oh, don't," said Bobby. "Don't you see how frightened he is? He thinks you're going to shut him up. I know he does. Look at his eyes." "They're like a fox's eyes when the beast's in a trap," said the farmer. "Oh, let me try," Bobby went on. "I do really know one or two French words if I could only think of them. Sometimes in moments of need, of great need, we can do wonderful things, things that in ordinary life we could hardly ever dream of doing." Bobby had never been anywhere near the top of her French class, but she must have learned something without knowing it, for now, looking at those wild, hunted eyes, she actually remembered, and what is more, spoke, some French words. She said, "Vous attendre? Ma mère parle français." "No." What's the French for being kind? Nobody knew. "Bon is good," said Phyllis. "Nous être bon pour vous." I do not know whether the man understood her words, but he understood the touch of the hand she thrust into his, and the kindness of the other hand that stroked his shabby sleeve. She pulled him gently towards the inmost sanctuary of the station master. The other children followed, and the station master shut the door in the face of the crowd, which stood a little while in the booking office talking and looking at the fast-closed yellow door, and then by ones and twos went its way, grumbling. Inside the station master's room, Bobby still held the stranger's hand and stroked his sleeve. "Here's a go," said the station master. "No ticket, doesn't even know where he wants to go. I'm not sure now but what I ought to send for the police." "Oh, don't!" all the children pleaded at once, and suddenly Bobby got between the others and the stranger, for she had seen that he was crying. By a most unusual piece of good fortune, she had a handkerchief in her pocket. By a still more uncommon accident, the handkerchief was moderately clean. Standing in front of the stranger, she got out the handkerchief and passed it to him, so that the others did not see. "Wait till Mother comes," Phyllis was saying. "She does speak French beautifully. You'll just love to hear her." "I'm sure he hasn't done anything like you're sent to prison for," said Peter. "Looks like without visible means to me," said the station master. "Well, I don't mind giving him the benefit of the doubt till your mamma comes. I should like to know what nation's got the credit of him, that I should." Then Peter had an idea. He pulled an envelope out of his pocket and showed that it was half full of foreign stamps. "Look here," he said, "let's show him these." Bobby looked and saw that the stranger had dried his eyes with her handkerchief, so she said, "All right." They showed him an Italian stamp and pointed from him to it and back again and made signs of question with their eyebrows. He shook his head. Then they showed him a Norwegian stamp, the common blue kind it was, and again he signed no. Then they showed him a Spanish one, and at that he took the envelope from Peter's hand and searched among the stamps with a hand that trembled. The hand that he reached out at last with a gesture as of one answering a question contained a Russian stamp. "He's Russian!" cried Peter, "or else he's like the man who was, in Kipling, you know." The train from Maidbridge was signalled in. "I'll stay with him till you bring mother in," said Bobby. "You're not afraid, missy?" "Oh, no," said Bobby, looking at the stranger, as she might have looked at a strange dog of doubtful temper. "You wouldn't hurt me, would you?" She smiled at him, and he smiled back, a queer, crooked smile, and then he coughed again, and the heavy rattling swish of the incoming train swept past, and the station master and Peter and Phyllis went out to meet it. Bobby was still holding the stranger's hand when they came back with Mother. The Russian rose and bowed very ceremoniously. Then Mother spoke in French, and he replied, haltingly at first, but presently in longer and longer sentences. The children, watching his face and Mother's, knew that he was telling her things that made her angry and pitying and sorry and indignant all at once. "Well, Mum, what's it all about?" The station master could not restrain his curiosity any longer. "Oh," said Mother, "it's all right. He's a Russian and he's lost his ticket, and I'm afraid he's very ill. If you don't mind, I'll take him home with me now. He's really quite worn out. I'll run down and tell you all about him tomorrow." "I hope you won't find you're taking home a frozen viper," said the station master doubtfully. "Oh, no," said Mother brightly, and she smiled. "I'm quite sure I'm not. Why, he's a great man in his own country, writes books, beautiful books. I've read some of them, but I'll tell you about it tomorrow." She spoke again in French to the Russian, and everyone could see the surprise and pleasure and gratitude in his eyes. He got up and politely bowed to the station master and offered his arm most ceremoniously to Mother. She took it, but anybody could have seen that she was helping him along, and not he her. "You girls run home and light a fire in the sitting room," Mother said, "and Peter had better go for the doctor." "Hi, Forres!" But it was Bobby who went for the doctor. "I hate to tell you," she said breathlessly when she came upon him in his shirt sleeves, weeding his pansy bed, "but Mother's got a very shabby Russian, and I'm sure he'll have to belong to your club. I'm certain he hasn't got any money. We found him at the station." "Found him? Was he lost, then?" asked the doctor, reaching for his coat. "Yes," said Bobby unexpectedly. "That's just what he was. He's been telling Mother the sad, sweet story of his life, in French, and she said, would you be kind enough to come directly if you were at home? He has a dreadful cough and he's been crying." The doctor smiled. "Oh, don't," said Bobby, "please don't. You wouldn't if you'd seen him. I never saw a man cry before. You don't know what it's like." Dr. Forrest wished then that he had not smiled. When Bobby and the doctor got to 3 Chimneys, that's the name of their house, the Russian was sitting in the armchair that had been Father's, stretching his feet to the blaze of a bright wood fire, and sipping the tea Mother had made him. "The man seems worn out, mind and body," was what the doctor said. "The cough's bad, but there's nothing that can't be cured. He ought to go straight to bed, though, and let him have a fire at night." "I'll make one in my room. It's the only one with a fireplace," said Mother. She did, and presently the doctor helped the stranger to bed. There was a big black trunk in Mother's room that none of the children had ever seen unlocked. Now, when she had lighted the fire, she unlocked it and took some clothes out, men's clothes, and set them to air by the newly lighted fire. Bobby, coming in with more wood for the fire, saw the mark on the nightshirt and looked over to the open trunk. All the things she could see were men's clothes, and the name marked on the shirt was Father's name. Then Father hadn't taken his clothes with him, and that nightshirt was one of Father's new ones. Bobby remembered its being made just before Peter's birthday. Why hadn't Father taken his clothes? Bobby slipped from the room. As she went, she heard the key turned in the lock of the trunk. Her heart was beating horribly. Why hadn't Father taken his clothes? When Mother came out of the room, Bobby flung tightly clasping arms round her waist and whispered, "Mother, Daddy isn't dead, is he?" "My darling, no! What made you think of anything so horrible?" I don't know," said Bobby, angry with herself, but still clinging to that resolution of hers not to see anything that Mother didn't mean her to see. Mother gave her a hurried hug. "Daddy was quite well when I heard from him last," she said, "and he'll come back to us some day. Don't fancy such horrible things, darling." Later on, when the Russian stranger had been made comfortable for the night, Mother came into the girls' room. She was to sleep there in Phyllis's bed, and Phyllis was to have a mattress on the floor, a most amusing adventure for Phyllis. Directly Mother came in, two white figures started up, and two eager voices called, "Now, Mother, tell us all about the Russian gentleman." A white shape hopped into the room. It was Peter, dragging his quilt behind him like the tail of a white peacock. "We have been patient," he said, "and I had to bite my tongue not to go to sleep, and I just nearly went to sleep, and I bit too hard, and it hurts ever so. Do tell us. Make a nice long story of it." "I can't make a long story of it tonight," said Mother. "I'm very tired." Bobby knew by her voice that Mother had been crying, but the others didn't know. "Well, make it as long as you can," said Phil, and Bobby got her arms round Mother's waist and snuggled close to her. "It's a story long enough to make a whole book of. He's a writer. He's written beautiful books. In Russia, at the time of the Tsar, one dared not say anything about rich people doing wrong or about the things that ought to be done to make poor people better and happier. If one did, one was sent to prison." "But they can't," said Peter. "People only go to prison when they've done wrong." "Or when the judges think they've done wrong," said Mother. "Yes, that is so in England, but in Russia it was different, and he wrote a beautiful book about poor people and how to help them. I've read it. There's nothing in it but goodness and kindness, and they sent him to prison for it. He was 3 years in a horrible dungeon with hardly any light, and all damp and dreadful, in prison, all alone, for 3 years. Mother's voice trembled a little and stopped suddenly. "But Mother," said Peter, "that can't be true now. It sounds like something out of a history book, the Inquisition or something." "It was true," said Mother. "It's all horribly true. Well, then they took him out and sent him to Siberia, a convict chained to other convicts. Wicked men who'd done all sorts of crimes, a long chain of them. They walked and walked and walked for days and weeks, till he thought they'd never stop walking. And overseers went behind them with whips, yes, whips, to beat them if they got tired, and some of them went lame and some fell down, and when they couldn't get up and go on, they beat them and then left them to die. Oh, it's too terrible. And at last they got to the mines, and he was condemned to stay there for life, just for writing a good, noble, splendid book." "How did he get away?" "When the war came, some of the Russian prisoners were allowed to volunteer as soldiers, and he volunteered. But he deserted at the first chance he got, and—" "But that's very cowardly, isn't it?" said Peter. "To desert, especially when it's war. Do you think he owed anything to a country that had done that to him? If he did, he owed more to his wife and children. He didn't know what had become of them." "Oh," cried Bobby, "he had them to think about and be miserable about too, then, all the time he was in prison." "Yes, he had them to think about and be miserable about all the time he was in prison. For anything he knew, they might have been sent to prison too. They did those things in Russia. But while he was in the mines, some friends managed to get a message to him that his wife and children had escaped and come to England. So when he deserted, he came here to look for them." "Has he got their address?" said the practical Peter. "No, just England. He was going to London, and he thought he had to change at our station, and then he found he'd lost his ticket and his purse. "Oh, do you think he'll find them? I mean his wife and children, not the ticket and things." "I hope so. Oh, I hope and pray that he'll find his wife and children again." Even Phyllis now perceived that Mother's voice was very unsteady. "Why, Mother," she said, "how very sorry you seem to be for him." Mother didn't answer for a minute. Then she just said, "Yes," and then she seemed to be thinking. The children were quiet. Presently she said, "Dears, when you say your prayers, I think you might ask God to show his pity upon all prisoners and captives." "To show his pity," Bobby repeated slowly, "upon all prisoners and captives. Is that right, Mother?" "Yes," said Mother, "upon all prisoners and captives." All prisoners and captives. And that's the end of that chapter. That's intriguing. Oh, my goodness. Hi, a rooster as well. I'm saying as well because I said hi to Forres, kind of, just before, because it wasn't a chapter break. So now it's time to have a drink of water. Get your drink. Go on. It's a good way to make sure you stay hydrated. And I checked, in case anyone's wondering, I checked and my lurk command actually works. So you put an exclamation mark and then the word lurk, L-U-R-K. No spaces, nothing like that. And that means that it tells everyone what lurking is here, basically. And I'm happy for you to lurk here because I'm doing all the talking, and it's not that I'm interacting in the chat a lot, and except for in the breaks. So hi roosters, hi Forres, it's great to have you here. I'm fairly certain that Nikki will be watching too, so hi Nikki. Nikki doesn't actually have a Twitch membership, but she watches anyway. And I'm just trying to find out why one of my settings on the screen here has disappeared on the other screen, obviously. So I'm really glad you've got a coffee there, Rooster. I would have a coffee, but it's too late in the day for me to have another coffee. But that's not a problem. No, I can't find it. I usually have a little bar on my my Twitch player screen, which is on my other thing, which has some other functions on. It has a bar that tells me some information, which I can't see at the moment. Anyway, not a problem. So I am going to carry on reading. So how are you finding it? I'm thinking that Mother is rather sympathetic to this chap. Partly, oh, well done. That's wonderful that you can drink coffee and still go to bed. I wish I could. You wouldn't happen to be ADHD, would you? I am, but unfortunately coffee doesn't do that for me. I don't know if it's my age though either. I'm pretty sure I'm quite a lot older than you. I think that Mother is extra sympathetic to this gentleman, partly because she's read his book, and partly because of the fact that Father is missing. There may be a little bit more to the story with Father having gone away. That we found out at the very beginning of the story that he'd gone away, but we're not quite sure why, and I think that's a big part of where this story is heading. So we shall find out, shall we? I am going to carry on reading. Lurk away. Oh, yes, same here. Unfortunately, my brain, the coffee doesn't actually calm it quite enough, although it probably is one of the reasons why I do well with coffee rather than not having it. I'm going to carry on reading now, and you can chat amongst yourselves or just listen. So The Railway Children by E. Nesbit, Chapter 6, Saviours of the Train. The Russian gentleman was better the next day, and the day after that, better still, and on the third day he was well enough to come into the garden. A basket chair was put for him, and he sat there. A basket chair is a wicker chair, a chair that's woven, as opposed to one that's made out of pieces of timber. It uses timber as a frame. But it was very, very comfortable, commonly used for sitting out in gardens and on a deck and that sort of thing. I know exactly what you mean, Rooster. Anyway, so I'll carry on reading. Basket chair was put for him, and he sat there dressed in clothes of father's which were too big for him. But when mother had hemmed up the ends of the sleeves and the trousers, the clothes did well enough. His was a kind face, now that it was no longer tired and frightened, and he smiled at the children whenever he saw them. They wished very much that he could speak English. Mother wrote several letters to people that she thought might know whereabouts in England a Russian gentleman's wife and family might possibly be. Not to the people she used to know before she came to live at Three Chimneys. She never wrote to any of them. But strange people, members of Parliament, and editors of papers, and secretaries of societies. And she did not do much of her story writing, only corrected proofs as she sat in the sun near the Russian, and talked to him every now and then. The children wanted very much to show how kindly they felt to this man, who had been sent to prison and to Siberia just for writing a beautiful book about poor people. They could smile at him, of course. They could, and they did. But if you smile too constantly, the smile is apt to get fixed, like the smile of a hyena, and then it no longer looks friendly, but simply silly. So they tried other ways and brought him flowers till the place where he sat was surrounded by little fading bunches of clover and roses and Canterbury bells. And then Phyllis had an idea. She beckoned mysteriously to the others and drew them into the backyard, and there, in a concealed spot between the pump and the water butt, that's a small tank, like a barrel, that catches roof water from the rain. It's often used for different things. She said, "You remember Perks promising me the very first strawberries out of his own garden?" Perks, you will recollect, was the porter. "Well, I should think they're ripe now. Let's go down and see." Mother had been down as she had promised to tell the station master the story of the Russian prisoner, but even the charms of the railway had been unable to tear the children away from the neighbourhood of the interesting stranger at the time, so they had not been to the station for 3 days. They went now, and to their surprise and distress were very coldly received by Perks. "Highly honoured, I'm sure," he said when they peeped in at the door of the porter's room, and he went on reading his newspaper. There was an uncomfortable silence. "Oh dear," said Bobby with a sigh, "I do believe you're cross." "What, me?" "Not me," said Perks loftily. "It ain't nothing to me." "What ain't nothing to you?" said Peter, too anxious and alarmed to change the form of words. "Nothing ain't nothing. What happens either here or elsewhere," says Perks. "If you likes to have your secrets, have 'em and welcome. That's what I say." The secret chamber of each heart was rapidly examined during the pause that followed. 3 heads were shaken. "We haven't got any secrets from you," said Bobby at last. "Maybe you have and maybe you haven't," said Perks. "It ain't nothing to me, and I wish you all a very good afternoon." He held up the paper between him and them and went on reading. "Oh, don't," said Phyllis in despair. "This is truly dreadful. Whatever it is, do tell us." "We didn't mean to do it, whatever it was." No answer. The paper was refolded, and Perks began on another column. "Look here," said Peter suddenly, "it's not fair. Even people who do crimes aren't punished without being told what it's for, as once they were in Russia." "I don't know nothing about Russia." "Oh, yes, you do, when Mother came down on purpose to tell you and Mr. Gills all about our Russian." "Can't you fancy it?" said Perks indignantly. "Don't you see him asking of me to step into his room and take a chair and listen to what her ladyship has to say?" "Do you mean to say you've not heard?" "Not so much as a breath. I did go so far as to put a question, and he shuts me up like a rat trap. 'Affairs of state, Perks,' says he, but I did think one of you would have nipped down to tell me. You're here sharp enough when you want to get anything out of old Perks." Phyllis flushed purple as she thought of the strawberries. "Information about locomotives or signals or the likes," said Perks. "We didn't know you didn't know. We thought Mother had told you." We wanted to tell you only we thought it would be stale news." All written as one word. The 3 spoke all at once. Perks said it was all very well and still held up the paper. Then Phyllis suddenly snatched it away and threw her arms round his neck. "Oh, let's kiss and be friends," she said. "We'll say we're sorry first if you like, but we didn't really know that you didn't know." "We are so sorry," said the others. And Perks at last consented to accept their apologies. Then they got him to come out and sit in the sun on the green railway bank, where the grass was quite hot to touch, and there sometimes, speaking one at a time, and sometimes all together, they told the porter the story of the Russian prisoner. "Well, I must say," said Perks, but he did not say it, whatever it was. "Yes, it's pretty awful, isn't it?" said Peter, "and I don't wonder you were curious about who the Russian was." "I wasn't curious, not so much as interested," said the porter. "Well, I do think Mr. Gills might have told you about it. It was horrid of him." "I don't keep no down on him for that, missy," said the porter. "'Cause why? I see his reasons. He wouldn't want to give away his own side with a tale like that here. It ain't human nature. A man's got to stand up for his own side, whatever they does. That's what it means by party politics. I should have done the same myself if that long-haired chap had been a Jap." "But the Japs don't do cruel, wicked things like that," said Bobby. "Perhaps not," said Perks cautiously. "Still, you can't be sure with foreigners. My own belief is that they're all tarred with the same brush." "Then why were you on the side of the Japs?" Peter asked. "Well, you see, you must take one side or the other, same as with Liberals and Conservatives. The great thing is to take your side and then stick to it, whatever happens." A signal sounded. "That's the 3:14 up," said Perks. "You lie low till she's through, and then we'll go up along of my place and see if there's any of them strawberries ripe what I told you about." "If any are ripe and you do give them to me," said Phyllis, "you won't mind if I give them to the poor Russian, will you?" Perks narrowed his eyes, then raised his eyebrows. "So it was them strawberries you come down for this afternoon, eh?" said he. This was an awkward moment for Phyllis. To say yes would seem rude and greedy and unkind to Perks, but she knew if she said no, she would not be pleased with herself afterwards, so, "Yes," she said, "it was." "Well done," said the porter. "Speak the truth and shame the—" But we'd have come down the very next day if we'd known you hadn't heard the story," said Phyllis, hastily. "I believe you, missy," said Perks, and sprang across the line 6 feet in front of the advancing train. Not something for the children to do. He leapt up and went across the line in a hurry. The girls hated to see him doing this, but Peter liked it. It was so exciting. The Russian gentleman was so delighted with the strawberries that the three racked their brains to find some other surprise for him. But all the racking did not bring out any idea more novel than wild cherries. And this idea occurred to them next morning. They had seen the blossom on the trees in the spring, and they knew where to look for wild cherries now that cherry time was here. The trees grew all up and along the rocky face of the cliff, out of which the mouth of the tunnel opened. There were all sorts of trees there, birches and beeches and baby oaks and hazels, and among them the cherry blossom had shone like snow and silver. The mouth of the tunnel was some way from Three Chimneys, so Mother let them take their lunch with them in a basket. And the basket would do to bring the cherries back if they found any. She also lent them her silver watch so that they should not be late for tea. Peter's Waterbury had taken it in its head not to go since the day when Peter had dropped it into the water butt. Old watches were not waterproof. And when I say old, I mean watches that were made many years ago. They never made them waterproof. And then they started. When they got to the top of the cutting, they leaned over the fence and looked down to where the railway lines lay at the bottom of what, as Phyllis said, was exactly like a mountain gorge. If it wasn't for the railway at the bottom, it would be as though the foot of man had never been there, wouldn't it? The sides of the cutting were of grey stone, very roughly hewn. Indeed, the top part of the cutting had been a little natural glen that had been cut deeper to bring it down to the level of the tunnel's mouth. Among the rocks, grass and flowers grew, and seeds dropped by birds in the crannies of the stone had taken root and grown into bushes and trees that overhung the cutting. Near the tunnel was a flight of steps leading down to the line, just wooden bars roughly fixed into the earth, very steep and narrow, more like a ladder than a stair. We'd better get down, said Peter. I'm sure the cherries would be quite easy to get at from the sides of the steps. You remember it was there we picked the cherry blossoms that we put on the rabbit's grave. So they went along the fence towards the little swing gate that is at the top of these steps, and they were almost at the gate when Bobby said, "Hush, stop." What was that? That was a very odd noise, but quite plainly to be heard through the sound of the wind in tree branches and the hum and whir of the telegraph wires. It was a sort of rustling, whispering sound. As they listened, it stopped, and then it began again. And this time it did not stop, but grew louder and more rustling and rumbling. "Look!" cried Peter suddenly. "The tree over there!" The tree he pointed at was one of those that had rough grey leaves and white flowers. The berries, when they come, are bright scarlet, but if you pick them, they disappoint you by turning black before you can get them home. And as Peter pointed, the tree was moving, not just the way trees ought to move when the wind blows through them, but all at once as though it were a live creature and were walking down the side of the cutting. "It's moving!" cried Bobby. "Oh, look, and so are the others. It's like the woods in Macbeth." "It's magic," said Phyllis breathlessly. "I always knew this railway was enchanted." It really did seem a little like magic. For all the trees for about 20 yards of the opposite bank seemed to be slowly walking down towards the railway line, the tree with the grey leaves bringing up the rear like some old shepherd driving a flock of green sheep. "What is it? Oh, what is it?" said Phyllis. "It's much too magic for me. I don't like it. Let's go home." But Bobby and Peter clung fast to the rail and watched breathlessly, and Phyllis made no movement towards going home by herself. The trees moved on and on. Some stones and loose earth fell down and rattled on the railway metals far below. "It's all coming down," Peter tried to say, but he found there was hardly any voice to say it with, and indeed, just as he spoke, the great rock on top of which the walking trees were leaned slowly forward. The trees, ceasing to walk, stood still and shivered. Leaning with the rock, they seemed to hesitate a moment, and then rock and trees and grass and bushes, with a rustling sound, slipped right away from the face of the cutting and fell on the line with a blundering crash that could have been heard half a mile off. A cloud of dust rose up. "Oh," said Peter in awestruck tones, "isn't it exactly like when coals come in, if there wasn't any roof to the cellar and you could see down?" "Look what a great mound it's made," said Bobby. "Yes," said Peter slowly. He was still leaning on the fence. "Yes," he said again, still more slowly. Then he stood upright. "The 11:29 hasn't gone by yet. We must let them know at the station or there'll be a most frightful accident." "Let's run," said Bobby and began, but Peter cried, "Come back," and looked at Mother's watch. He was very prompt and businesslike, and his face looked whiter than they had ever seen it. "No time. It's 2 miles away and it's past 11. "Couldn't we," suggested Phyllis breathlessly, "couldn't we climb up a telegraph post and do something to the wires?" "We don't know how," said Peter. "They do it in the war," said Phyllis. "I know, I've heard of it." "They only cut them, silly," said Peter, "and that doesn't do any good. And we couldn't cut them even if we got up, and we couldn't get up. If we had anything red, we could get down on the line and wave it. But the train wouldn't see us till it got round the corner, and then it could see the mound just as well as us. Better, because it's much bigger than us." "If only we had something red," Peter repeated. "We could go round the corner and wave to the train. We might wave anyway. They would only think it was just us as usual. We've waved so often before. Anyway, let's get down." They got down the steep stairs. Bobby was pale and shivering. Peter's face looked thinner than usual. Phyllis was red-faced and damp with anxiety. "Oh, how hot I am," she said, "and I thought it was going to be cold. I wish we hadn't put on our—" She stopped short and then ended in a quite different tone. Our flannel petticoats. Bobby turned at the bottom of the stairs. Oh, yes, she cried. They're red. Let's take them off. They did, and with the petticoats rolled up under their arms, ran along the railway, skirting the newly fallen mound of stones and rock and earth and bent, crushed, twisted lit trees. They ran at their best pace. Peter led, but the girls were not far behind. They reached the corner that hid the mound from the sight of the railway line, from the straight line of railway that ran half a mile without a curve or corner. Now, said Peter, taking hold of the largest flannel petticoat. You're not, Phyllis faltered. You're not going to tear them? Shut up, said Peter, with brief sternness. Oh, yes, said Bobby. Tear them into little bits if you like. Don't you see, Phil, if we can't stop the train, there'll be a real live accident, with people killed. Oh, horrible. Here, Peter, you'll never tear it through the band. She took the red flannel petticoat from him and tore it off an inch from the band. Then she tore the other in the same way. There, said Peter, tearing in his turn. He divided each petticoat into 3 pieces. Now we've got 6 flags. He looked at the watch again. And we've got 7 minutes. We must have flagstaffs. The knives given to boys are, for some odd reason, seldom of the kind of steel that keeps sharp. The young saplings had to be broken off. 2 came up by the roots. The leaves were stripped from them. We must cut holes in the flags and run the sticks through the holes, said Peter, and the holes were cut. The knife was sharp enough to cut flannel with. 2 of the flags were set up on heaps of loose stones between the sleepers on the down line. Then Phyllis and Roberta took each a flag and stood ready to wave it as soon as the train came in sight. I shall have the other 2 myself, said Peter, because it was my idea to wave something red. There are petticoats, though, Phyllis was beginning, but Bobby interrupted. Oh, what does it matter who waves what, if we can only save the train? I'm just thinking, hang on a minute. I might be able to show you an interesting picture. I'll just carry on reading, though. If we can only save the train. Perhaps Peter had not rightly calculated the number of minutes it would take 11:29 to get from the station to the place where they were, or perhaps the train was late. Anyway, it seemed a very long time that they waited. Phyllis grew impatient. I expect the watch is wrong and the train's gone by, she said. Peter relaxed the heroic attitude he had chosen to show off his 2 flags, and Bobby began to feel sick with surprise. It seemed to her that they had been standing there for hours and hours, holding those silly little red flannel flags that no one would ever notice. The train wouldn't care. It would go rushing by them and tear round the corner and go crashing into that awful mound, and everyone would be killed. Her hands grew very cold and trembled so that she could hardly hold the flag. And then came the distant rumble and hum of the metals, that's the rails, and a puff of white steam showed far away along the stretch of line. Stand firm, said Peter, and wave like mad. When it gets to that big furze bush, that's the gorse, step back, but go on waving. So get off the line, but keep waving. Don't stand on the line, Bobby. The train came rattling along very, very fast. They don't see us! They don't see us! It's all no good, cried Bobby. The 2 little flags on the line swayed as the nearing train shook and loosened the heaps of loose stones that held them up. One of them slowly leaned over and fell on the line. Bobby jumped forward and caught it up and waved it. Her hands did not tremble now. I'm just seeing if I can make this picture here bigger for you. Come on, give me the little arrow. There's a... Oh, goodness. There, got it. But is it going to do it? Yes. I'm just going to cover the chat for a minute, and then I will resize it again. Here it comes. Here's the picture. That's the picture that we see here, that side, of the children standing by the railway line, holding onto their sticks with the flags. See? What an inventive bunch of children they are. Such good thinking. Bobby jumped forward and caught it now and waved it. Her hands did not tremble now. It seemed that the train came on as fast as ever. It was very near now. I'll just see if I can get that to resize again so you can go back to seeing your chat. There, that'll do. "Keep off the line, you silly cuckoo," said Peter fiercely. "It's no good," Bobby said again. "Stand back," cried Peter suddenly, and he dragged Phyllis back by the arm. But Bobby cried, "Not yet, not yet," and waved her 2 flags right over the line. The front of the engine looked black and enormous. Its voice was loud and harsh. "Oh, stop, stop, stop," cried Bobby. No one heard her. At least Peter and Phyllis didn't, for the oncoming rush of the train covered the sound of her voice with a mountain of sound. But afterwards she used to wonder whether the engine itself had not heard her. It seemed almost as though it had, for it slackened swiftly, slackened and stopped, not 20 yards from the place where Bobby's 2 flags waved over the line. She saw the great black engine stop dead. But somehow she could not stop waving the flags, and when the driver and the fireman had got off the engine, and Peter and Phyllis had gone to meet them and pour out their excited tale of the awful mound just round the corner, Bobby still waved the flags, but more and more feebly and jerkily. When the others turned towards her, she was lying across the line with her hands flung forward and still gripping the sticks of the little red flannel flags. The engine driver picked her up and carried her to the train and laid her on the cushions of a first-class carriage. "Gone right off in a faint," he said. "Poor little woman. And no wonder. I'll just have a look at this here mound of yours and then we'll run you back to the station and get her seen to." It was horrible to see Bobby lying so white and quiet, with her lips blue and parted. "I believe that's what people look like when they're dead," whispered Phyllis. "Don't!" said Peter sharply. They sat by Bobby on the blue cushions, and the train went in reverse. Before it reached their station, Bobby had sighed and opened her eyes and rolled herself over and began to cry. This cheered the others wonderfully. They had seen her cry before, but they had never seen her faint, nor anyone else for that matter. They had not known what to do when she was fainting, but now she was only crying, they could thump her on the back and tell her not to, just as they always did. And presently, when she stopped crying, they were able to laugh at her for being such a coward as to faint. When the station was reached, the 3 were the heroes of an agitated meeting on the platform. The praises they got for their prompt action and their common sense, their ingenuity, were enough to have turned anybody's head. Phyllis enjoyed herself thoroughly. She had never been a real heroine before, and the feeling was delicious. Peter's ears got very red. That's what some people's ears get all red when they get sort of embarrassed, flushed. Yet he too enjoyed himself. Only Bobby wished they all wouldn't. She wanted to get away. "You'll hear from the company about this, I expect," said the station master. Bobby wished she might never hear of it again. She pulled at Peter's jacket. "Oh, come away, I want to go home," she said. So they went. And as they went, the station master and porter and guards and driver and firemen and passengers sent up a cheer. "Oh, listen," said Phyllis. "That's for us." "Yes," said Peter. "I say, I am glad I thought about something red and waving it. How lucky we did put on our red flannel petticoats," said Phyllis. Bobby said nothing. She was thinking of the horrible mound and the trustful train rushing towards it. "And it was us that saved them," said Peter. "How dreadful if they had all been killed," said Phyllis. "Wouldn't it, Bobby?" "We never got any cherries after all," said Bobby. The others thought her rather heartless. And that's the end of that chapter. Wow. I think the adrenaline would have been a little bit extreme for her. No wonder she fainted. Oh my goodness, that would have been, a little bit much. And anyway, so hi everybody, whoever's here as part of the raid, thank you for coming. That's great. Great to have you here. I read stories. I read old-fashioned children's stories. That's what I've been doing. And I usually only talk to chat in between chapters. And I usually read for about an hour to an hour and a quarter, roughly. Sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes it's a bit less. Sorry, Punch, for the fact that your comment was modded out. I've got an auto mod on because we get a lot of children who are going to be watching this at some stage. And so therefore the bot settings are quite strict. Unfortunately, I still haven't actually managed to figure out the right tweak on them. And one of those settings, which I really need to see to, is capitalization. When all the words are in caps, which your either comment or auto comment was, it edits them out. I really need to learn more about how to modify my bot settings because they're a little bit too strict at times. So yeah, language, inappropriate contexts and things like that will usually get modded out. That's the main reason we've got them. But thank you for being here, and I am going to be reading one more chapter. But it's so great that you folk could turn up. Sorry, got a tickle in the throat. There it is. I found the thing that I accidentally turned off before. Now I've just got to wait for it to show up. Yay! And we will be carrying on in a minute. So, I read books such as The Railway Children, which you will see in the picture on the overlay up there, by Edith Nesbit. They're books that are in public domain. So that means they've been around for quite a long time. And people like me who grew up with parents who were rather old-fashioned and enjoyed old books that were old for them, I got to read their old books, or they read the stories to me. And I think that some of them are quite lovely stories, and people miss out on what they're like. Yay, I'm glad you're here, and driving a train. That's good to see, Rooster. So I think it's a great opportunity for people to actually hear stories that otherwise they wouldn't hear. I know that on YouTube there are a lot of people who, and I think most of it started during lockdown last year with COVID, a lot of them started with teachers reading stories to their class students, but making these stories available for other people to see too, not just their class. But all of the ones I've seen have been modern stories. Often they're picture books because, you can tell the story and show the pictures and get the kids engaged with them, rather than just reading it. Some of them are told by people who are brilliant voice actors. I'm not. I'm just a mum. I'm just a housewife. I've read lots of stories, but for my own children. So I believe it's a great thing to be able to listen to stories. People love audiobooks. I love audiobooks. I will often listen to audiobooks when I'm doing a sewing project on my vintage sewing machine. Or if I'm cooking dinner, I've got a little Bluetooth speaker that I put on, and I have it sitting next to me with my phone casting to the speaker, and I'll listen to an audiobook while I'm cooking dinner. So for some people, I've got friends who listen to my YouTubes while they're doing craft projects. I've got a friend who's an artist who does craft projects while I'm reading. Sometimes she'll be listening to the live stream, sometimes it will be to the YouTube saves. I've got another friend who likes going to bed at night where they live, listening to the stories as she goes off to sleep. And I think it's wonderful. They might be children's stories, but they're not just for children. And often because they're old stories that I'm reading, they're set in a completely different time and place. And it's a great way to actually get to know places other than our places and times other than our times, instead of just living in the here and now. So I am going to read one more chapter. It's quite a long one, so this is probably going to take us through till about 4:30 New Zealand time, but that's okay. If you have to go, that's fine. You can listen to the recording later to finish it off, or you can wait a couple of weeks and listen to it over on YouTube. I do transfer them all over to YouTube, so I'm going to give you my YouTube. I need to make sure I'm typing in a text box and not just randomly typing. I'll give you the link to my YouTube channel, and then you can actually go over there, subscribe, because then it will notify you if I have put up some new stories. I group my stories into the playlists from the book for the books that they're from. We've already got quite a few over there. There's Millie Molly Mandy stories. That's stories written about a little girl who was preschool and just starting school age. Very, very simple, but actually quite sweet, quite lovely. I've got The Wind in the Willows, the original Wind in the Willows, not the movie versions or anything like that, not the retellings. I haven't got any Winnie the Pooh yet. Those are probably in public domain, I'm not sure. The Wind in the Willows, we've got some other ones. The Secret Garden, A Little Princess. We've got The Princess and the Goblin, The Princess and Curdie. Some of them are really quite old. Quite old, and other ones are a bit newer. So you're most welcome to go over and subscribe over there, and it'll notify you when I put new ones up. They will be the stories I've done here, but they only stay here for 2 weeks. So if you want to catch them again, go and have a listen over on YouTube. Whatever. There's a link down below if you miss it in the chat. And also we have a Discord server, which doesn't really have a lot in it yet, but please feel free to join it. If you like sketching while you're listening, as a way to keep your hands busy, your body busy, while your mind is listening. Some people are like me, are like that. When they're listening to a story, you have to have something with your hands, going on with your hands, so you can focus on the story. If you like doodling pictures to go with the story, post them over there. If you find old illustrations from any of the stories we've read, post them over there. If you have suggestions for new old books for me to read, old books are what I read, but they're new to what we're doing, post them over there on the Discord. Get to know each other as well. Make friends with other people who may have some interests that are in common with you. And it doesn't have to be your main focus. I mean, you can be a hardcore gamer and heavy death metal music fan and still enjoy old-fashioned stories. I do a bit of those things, except that I'm not technically a hardcore gamer, because I don't play first-person shooters, because I can't. I play different sorts of games. Gamers think I'm not a gamer, but people who are not gamers think I am a gamer, because I quite happily play games for hours. Yeah. Anyway, so next chapter, I shall stop leathering and read. So, The Railway Children by E. Nesbit, Chapter 7, For Valour. I hope you don't mind my telling you a good deal about Roberta. This is the author speaking. The fact is, I'm growing very fond of her. The more I observe her, the more I love her, and I notice all sorts of things about her that I like. For instance, she was quite oddly anxious to make other people happy, and she could keep a secret, a tolerably rare accomplishment. Oh, by the way, is the volume loud enough with me reading? I can possibly make it slightly louder. I'm not sure, but you need to let me know if it's not loud enough. I'm going to keep reading unless I see something otherwise in the chat. She could keep a secret, a tolerably rare accomplishment. Also, she had the power of silent sympathy. That sounds rather dull, I know, but it's not so dull as it sounds. It just means that a person is able to know that you are unhappy and to love you extra on that account, without bothering you by telling you all the time how sorry she is for you. That was what Bobby was like. She knew that Mother was unhappy and that Mother had not told her the reason. So she just loved Mother more and never said a single word that could let Mother know how earnestly her little girl wondered what Mother was unhappy about. This needs practice. It's not so easy as you might think. Whatever happened, and all sorts of nice, pleasant, ordinary things happened, such as picnics, games, and buns for tea, Bobby always had these thoughts at the back of her mind. Mother's unhappy. Why? I don't know. She doesn't want me to know. I won't try to find out. But she is unhappy. Why? I don't know. She doesn't, and so on, repeating and repeating like a tune that you don't know the stopping part of. What we would call an earworm. The Russian gentleman still took up a good deal of everybody's thoughts. All the editors and secretaries of societies and members of Parliament had answered Mother's letter as politely as they knew how, but none of them could tell where the wife and children of Mr. Szczypański, I think I'll try that again just in case, Szczypański, there you go, that's what we're going with, would be likely to be. Did I tell you that the Russian's very Russian name was that? No, she hasn't. Bobby had another quality which you will hear differently described by different people. Some of them call it interfering in other people's business, and some call it helping lame dogs over stiles, and some call it loving kindness. It just means trying to help people. She racked her brains to think of some way of helping the Russian gentleman to find his wife and children. He had learned a few words of English now. He could say good morning and good night and please and thank you and pretty when the children brought him flowers, and very good when they asked him how he slept. The way he smiled when he said his English was, Bobby felt, just too sweet for anything. She used to think of his face because she fancied it would help her to some way of helping him, but it did not. Yet his being there cheered her because she saw that it made Mother happier. She likes to have someone to be good to, even besides us, said Bobby, and I know she hated to let him have Father's clothes, but I suppose it hurt nice, or she wouldn't have. For many and many a night after the day when she and Peter and Phyllis had saved the train from a wreck by waving their little red flannel flags, Bobby used to wake up screaming and shivering, seeing again that horrible mound and the poor dear trustful engine rushing on toward it. Just thinking that it was doing its swift duty and that everything was clear and safe, and then a warm thrill of pleasure used to run through her at the remembrance of how she and Peter and Phyllis and the red flannel petticoats had really saved everybody. One morning a letter came. It was addressed to Peter and Bobby and Phyllis. They opened it with enthusiastic curiosity, for they did not often get letters. The letter said, "Dear Sir and Ladies, it is proposed to make a small presentation to you in commemoration of your prompt and courageous action in warning the train on the," and then there's a date, instance, "and thus averting what must, humanly speaking, have been a terrible accident. The presentation will take place at the," and then there's a gap there for the name of it, just for our reading. That's how they used to do it in stories. "Station at 3 o'clock on the 30th instance. If this time and place will be convenient to you. Yours faithfully, J.B.'s Inglewood, Secretary, Great Northern and Southern Railway Company." There had never been a prouder moment in the lives of the three children. They rushed to Mother with the letter, and she also felt proud and said so, and this made the children happier than ever. "But if the presentation is money, you must say thank you, but would rather not take it," said Mother. "I'll wash your Indian muslins at once," she added. "You must look tidy on an occasion like this." Indian muslins was a term used as a name for a particular type of dress, summer dress, that girls often had, made out of muslin from India probably, but lightweight, summery, but also quite dressy, for proper occasions, not their normal play clothes, and not used as normal play clothes because muslin tears very easily. You must look tidy on an occasion like this. Phil and I can wash them, said Bobby, if you'll iron them, Mother. Washing is rather fun. I wonder whether you've ever done it. This is washing by hand. This particular washing took place in the back kitchen, which had a stone floor and a very big stone sink under its window. Let's put the bath on the sink, said Phyllis. Then we can pretend we're out-of-doors washerwomen like Mother saw in France. But they were washing in the cold river, said Peter, his hands in his pockets, not in hot water. This is a hot river then, said Phyllis. Lend a hand with the bath, there's a dear. I should like to see a deer lending a hand, said Peter, but he lent his. Now to rub and scrub and scrub and rub, said Phyllis, hopping joyously about as Bobby carefully carried the heavy kettle from the kitchen fire. Oh no, said Bobby, greatly shocked. You don't rub muslin. You put the boiled soap in the hot water and make it all frothy lathery, and then you shake the muslin and squeeze it ever so gently, and all the dirt comes out. It's only clumsy things like tablecloths and sheets that have to be rubbed. That's because, as I said, muslin is a very delicate fabric. Well, I didn't use those words. It tears easily, and the threads shift, so it doesn't look right. That's why you don't rub it. You just shake it backwards and forwards in the water. Swish it in the water. The lilac and the Gloire de Dijon roses, however you say it, I don't speak French, outside the window swayed in the soft breeze. It's a nice drying day, that's one thing, said Bobby, feeling very grown up. Oh, I do wonder what wonderful feelings we shall have when we wear the Indian muslin dresses. Yes, so do I, said Phyllis, shaking and squeezing the muslin in quite a professional manner. Now we squeeze out the soapy water. No, we mustn't twist them and then rinse them. That would tear it if you twisted them, wrung it. I'll hold them while you and Peter empty the bath and get clean water. A presentation? That means presents, said Peter, as his sisters, having duly washed the pegs and wiped the line, hung up the dresses to dry. That's old timber pegs can actually develop something on the surface that makes white things go yellow when it's against them. So that's why. And also with soot and things from chimneys and from trains on the clothesline. So yes, you don't want your freshly washed clothes to get dirty from the line and the pegs. It might be anything, said Phyllis. What I've always wanted is a baby elephant. But I suppose they wouldn't know that. Suppose it was gold models of steam engines, said Bobby. Or a big model of the scene of the prevented accident, suggested Peter, with a little model train and dolls dressed like us and the engine driver and the fireman and passengers. Do you like, said Bobby, doubtfully drying her hands on the rough towel that hung on a roller at the back of the scullery door, do you like us being rewarded for saving a train? Yes, I do, said Peter downrightly. And don't you try to come it over with us that you don't like it too, because I know you do. Yes, said Bobby doubtfully, I know I do, but oughtn't we be satisfied with just having done it and not to ask for anything more? Who did ask for anything more, silly, said her brother. Victoria Cross soldiers don't ask for it, but they're glad enough to get it all the same. Perhaps it'll be medals, and then when I'm very old indeed I shall show them to my grandchildren and say, we only did our duty, and they'll be awfully proud of me. You have to be married, warned Phyllis, or you don't have any grandchildren. I suppose I shall have to be married some day, said Peter, but it will be an awful bother having her round all the time. I'd like to marry a lady who has trances and only woke up once or twice a year. Just to say you were the light of her life and then go to sleep again. Yes, that wouldn't be bad, said Bobby. When I get married, said Phyllis, I shall want him to want me to be awake all the time, so that I can hear him say how nice I am. "I think it would be nice," said Bobby, "to marry someone very poor, and then you'd do all the work and he'd love you most frightfully and see the blue wood smoke curling up among the trees from the domestic hearth as he came home from work every night. I say, we've got to answer that letter and say that the time and place will be convenient to us. There's the soap, Peter. We are both as clean as clean. That pink box of writing paper you had on your birthday, Phil." So she's covering several bases there. Peter needs to get clean. The girls are quite clean because they've just been doing a lot of washing, haven't they? So we shall carry on. It took some time to arrange what should be said. Mother had gone back to her writing, and several sheets of pink paper with scalloped gilt edges and green four-leaf shamrocks in the corner were spoiled before the three had decided what to say. Then each made a copy and signed it with its own name. The three-fold letter ran, "Dear Mr. Jabez Inglewood, thank you very much. We did not want to be rewarded, but only to save the train. But we are glad you think so much. But we are glad you think so, and thank you very much. The time and place you say will be quite convenient to us. Thank you very much. Your affectate little friend." It's meant to be affectionate, but that's how they spelled it. Then came the name, and after it, "P.S. Thank you very much." "Washing is much easier than ironing," said Bobby, taking the clean, dry dresses off the line. "I do love to see things come clean. Oh, I don't know how we shall wait till it's time to know what presentation they're going to present." Then at last, it seemed a very long time after, it was the day. The three children went down to the station at the proper time, and everything that happened was so odd that it seemed like a dream. The station master came out to meet them, in his best clothes, as Peter noticed at once, and led them into the waiting room where once they had played the advertisement game. It looked quite different now. A carpet had been put down, and there were pots of roses on the mantelpiece and on the window ledges, green branches stuck up like holly and laurel are at Christmas, over the framed advertisement of Cook's Tours and the Beauties of Devon and the Paris-Lyon Railway. That's where more of those were put up. There were quite a number of people there besides the porter, 2 or 3 ladies in smart dresses, and quite a crowd of gentlemen in high hats and frock coats, besides everybody who belonged to the station. They recognised several people who had been in the train on the red flannel petticoat day. Best of all, their own old gentleman was there, and his coat and hat and collar seemed more than ever different from everyone else's. He shook hands with them, and then everybody sat down on chairs, and a gentleman in spectacles, they found out afterwards that he was the district superintendent, began quite a long speech. Very clever indeed. I am not going to write the speech down. First, because you would think it dull, and secondly, because it made all the children blush so, and get so hot about the ears that I am quite anxious to get away from this part of the subject, and thirdly, because the gentleman took so many words to say what he had to say that I really haven't time to write them down. He said all sorts of nice things about the children's bravery and presence of mind, and when he had done, he sat down, and everyone who was there clapped and said, "Hear, hear!" And then the old gentleman got up and said things too. It was very like a prize-giving, and then he called the children one by their names, and gave each of them a beautiful gold watch and chain. And inside the watches were engraved, after the name of the watch's new owner, "From the directors of the Northern and Southern Railway, in grateful recognition of the courageous and prompt action which averted an accident on the date 1905. A watch and chain. They didn't do wrist watches. It was a pocket watch which had a chain that attached it to your clothing so you didn't lose it. The watches were the most beautiful you can possibly imagine, and each one had a blue leather case to live in when it was at home. "You must make a speech now and thank everyone for their kindness," whispered the station master in Peter's ear and pushed him forward. "Begin, ladies and gentlemen," he added. He's helping them. Each of the children had already said thank you, quite properly. "Oh dear," said Peter, but he did not resist the push. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a rather husky voice. Then there was a pause, and he heard his heart beating in his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he went on with a rush, "it's most awfully good of you, and we shall treasure the watches all our lives, but really we don't deserve it because what we did wasn't anything really. At least, I mean, it was awfully exciting, and what I mean to say, thank you all very, very much." The people clapped Peter more than they had done the district superintendent, and then everybody shook hands with them, and as soon as politeness would let them, they got away and tore up the hill to Three Chimneys with their watches in their hands. It was a wonderful day, the kind of day that very seldom happens to anybody, and to most of us, not at all. "I did want to talk to the old gentleman about something else," said Bobby, "but it was so public, like being in church." "What did you want to say?" asked Phyllis. "I'll tell you when I've thought about it more," said Bobby. So when she had thought a little more, she wrote a letter. "My dearest old gentleman," it said, "I want most awfully to ask you something. If you could get out of the train and go by the next, it would do. I do not want you to give me anything. Mother says we ought not to, and besides we do not want any things, only to talk to you about a prisoner and captive. Your loving little friend, Bobby." She got the station master to give the letter to the old gentleman, and next day she asked Peter and Phyllis to come down to the station with her at the time when the train that brought the old gentleman from town would be passing through. So he's not going to work, he's coming home from work. He's going home. So it's less of an issue if he gets off that train and catches the next one. She explained her idea to them, and they approved thoroughly. They had all washed their hands and faces and brushed their hair and were looking as tidy as they knew how, but Phyllis, always unlucky, had upset a jug of lemonade down the front of her dress. There was no time to change, and the wind happening to blow from the coal yard, her frock was soon powdered with grey, which stuck to the sticky lemonade stains and made her look, as Peter said, like any little gutter child. So that's coal dust. It was decided that she should keep behind the others as much as possible. "Perhaps the old gentleman won't notice," said Bobby. "The aged are often weak in the eyes." There was no sign of weakness, however, in the eyes or in any other part of the old gentleman as he stepped from the train and looked up and down the platform. The three children, now that it came to the point, suddenly felt that rush of deep shyness which makes your ears red and hot, your hands warm and wet, and the tip of your nose pink and shiny. "Oh," said Phyllis, "my heart's thumping like a steam engine, right under my sash, too." "Nonsense," said Peter. "People's hearts aren't under their sashes." "I don't care, mine is," said Phyllis. "If you're going to talk like a poetry book," said Peter, "my heart's in my mouth." "My heart's in my boots, if you come to that," said Roberta. "But do come on, he'll think we're idiots." "He won't be far wrong," said Peter gloomily, and they went forward to meet the old gentleman. "Hello," he said, shaking hands with them all in turn. "This is a very great pleasure." "It was good of you to get out," Bobby said, perspiring and polite. He took her arm and drew her into the waiting room where she and the others had played the advertisement game the day they found the Russian. Phyllis and Peter followed. "Well," said the old gentleman, giving Bobby's arm a kind little shake before he let it go. "Well, what is it?" "Oh, please," said Bobby. "Yes," said the old gentleman. "What I mean to say," said Bobby. "Well," said the old gentleman. "It's all very nice and kind," said she. "But," he said. "I wish I might say something," she said. "Say it," said he. "Well then," said Bobby, and out came the story of the Russian who had written the beautiful book about poor people, and had been sent to prison and to Siberia for just that. "And what we want more than anything in the world is to find his wife and children for him," said Bobby. "But we don't know how, but you must be most horribly clever, or you wouldn't be a direction of the railway, and if you knew how, and would. We'd rather have that than anything else in the world. We'd go without the watches even if you could sell them and find his wife with the money. and the others said so too, though not with too much enthusiasm. Said the old gentleman, pulling down the white waistcoat that had the big gilt buttons on it. Pulling down the bottom edge of it. It's something that people do when they're thinking. What did you say the name was? Frying Pansky? No, said Bobby earnestly. I'll write it down for you. It doesn't really look at all like that except when you say it. Have you a bit of pencil in the back of an envelope? She asked. The old gentleman got out a gold pencil case and a beautiful, sweet-smelling green Russian leather notebook and opened it at a new page. Here, he said, write it here. She wrote down Szczypansky and said, that's how you write it. You call it Szczepansky. There you go. Now I know how to say it. Szczepansky. The old gentleman took out a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles and fitted them on his nose. When he had read the name, he looked quite different. That man! Bless my soul, he said. Why, I've read his book. It's translated into every European language. A fine book, a noble book. And so your mother took him in, like the Good Samaritan. Well, I'll tell you what, youngsters, your mother must be a very good woman. Of course she is, said Phyllis in astonishment. And you're a very good man, said Bobby, very shy but firmly resolved to be polite. You flatter me, said the old gentleman, taking off his hat with a flourish. And now am I to tell you what I think of you? Oh, please don't, said Bobby hastily. Why? Asked the old gentleman. I don't exactly know, said Bobby, only if it's horrid I don't want you to, and if it's nice I'd rather you didn't. The old gentleman laughed. Well then, he said, I'll only just say that I'm very glad you came to me about this. Very glad indeed. And I shouldn't be surprised if I found out something very soon. I know a great many Russians in London, and every Russian knows his name. Mr. Szczepansky's name. Now tell me all about yourselves. He turned to the others, but there was only one other, and that was Peter. Phyllis had disappeared. Tell me all about yourself, said the old gentleman again, and quite naturally Peter was stricken dumb. All right, we'll have an examination, said the old gentleman. You two sit on the table, and I'll sit on the bench and ask questions. He did, and out came their names and ages, their father's name and business, how long they had lived at Three Chimneys, and a great deal more. The questions were beginning to turn on a herring and a half for threepence. I'm not sure about that saying. When the door of the waiting room was kicked open by a boot. As the boot entered, everyone could see that its lace was coming undone, and in came Phyllis, very slowly and carefully. In one hand she carried a large tin can, and in the other a thick slice of bread and butter. Afternoon tea, she announced proudly, and held the can and the bread and butter out to the old gentleman, who took them and said, Bless my soul. Yes, said Phyllis. It's very thoughtful of you, said the old gentleman. Very. But you might have got a cup, said Bobby, and a plate. Perks always drinks out of the can, said Phyllis, flushing red. I think it was very nice of him to give it to me at all, let alone cups and plates, she added. So do I, said the old gentleman, and he drank some of the tea and tasted the bread and butter. And then it was time for the next train, and he got into it with many goodbyes and kind last words. Well, said Peter, when they were left on the platform and the tail lights of the train disappeared round the corner, it's my belief that we've lighted a candle today, like Latimer, you know, when he was being burned, and there'll be fireworks for our Russian before long. And so there were. Excuse me. It wasn't 10 days after the interview in the waiting room that the three children were sitting on top of the biggest rock in the field below their house, watching the 5:15 steam away from the station along the bottom of the valley. They saw, too, the few people who had got out at the station straggling up the road towards the village. And they saw one person leave the road and open the gate that led across the fields to Three Chimneys and to nowhere else. Who on earth? Said Peter, scrambling down from the rock. Let's go and see, said Phyllis. And so they did. When they got near enough to see who the person was, they saw it was their old gentleman himself, his brass buttons winking in the afternoon sunshine, and his white waistcoat looking whiter than ever against the green of the field. "Hello!" shouted the children, waving their hands. "Hello!" shouted the old gentleman, waving his hat. And then the three started to run, and when they got to him they had hardly any breath left to say, "How do you do?" "Good news," said he. "I found your Russian friend's wife and child, and I couldn't resist the temptation of giving myself the pleasure of telling him." But as he looked at Bobby's face, he felt that he could resist that temptation. "Here," he said to her, "you run on and tell him. The other two will show me the way." Bobby ran, but when she had breathlessly panted out the news to the Russian and Mother, sitting in the quiet garden, when Mother's face had lighted up so beautifully and she had said half a dozen quick French words to the exile, Bobby wished that she had not carried the news, for the Russian sprang up with a cry that made Bobby's heart leap and then tremble, a cry of love and longing such as she had never heard. Then he took Mother's hand and kissed it quietly and reverently, and then he sank down in his chair and covered his face with his hands and sobbed. Bobby crept away. She did not want to see the others just then, but she was as gay as anybody when the endless French talking was over, and when Peter had torn down to the village for buns and cakes, and the girls had got tea ready and taken it out to the garden. The old gentleman was almost merry and delightful. He seemed to be able to talk in French and English almost at the same moment, and Mother did nearly as well. It was a delightful time. Mother seemed as if she could not make enough fuss about the old gentleman, and she said yes at once when he asked if he might present some goodies to his little friends. The word was new to the children, but they guessed that it meant sweets, for the 3 large pink and green boxes, tied with green ribbon, which he took out of his bag, held unheard-of layers of beautiful chocolates. The Russian's few belongings were packed, and they all saw him off at the station. Then Mother turned to the old gentleman and said, "I don't know how to thank you for everything. It has been a real pleasure to me to see you, but we live very quietly. I am so sorry that I can't ask you to come and see us again." The children thought this very hard. When they had made a friend, and such a friend, they would dearly have liked him to come and see them again. What the old gentleman thought they couldn't tell. He only said, "I consider myself very fortunate, madam, to have been received once at your house." "Ah," said Mother, "I know I must seem surly and ungrateful, but you could never seem anything but a most charming and gracious lady," said the old gentleman with another of his bows. And as he turned to go up the hill, Bobby saw her mother's face. "How tired you look, Mammy," she said. "Lean on me." "It's my place to give Mother my arm," said Peter. "I'm the head man of the family when Father's away." Mother took an arm of each. "How awfully nice," said Phyllis, skipping joyfully, "to think of the dear Russian embracing his long-lost wife. The baby must have grown quite a lot since he saw it." "Yes," said Mother. "I wonder whether Father will think I've grown," Phyllis went on, skipping still more gaily. "I have grown already, haven't I, Mother?" "Yes," said Mother. "Oh, yes." And Bobby and Peter felt her hands tighten on their arms. "Poor old Mammy, you are tired," said Peter. Bobby said, "Come on, Phil, I'll race you to the gate." And she started the race, though she hated doing it. You know why Bobby did that. Mother only thought that Bobby was tired of walking slowly. Even mothers who love you better than anyone else ever will don't always understand. And that's the end of that chapter and today's reading. All sorts of things happening, hey? Goodness gracious me. So the next time we read, we will be reading chapter 8, which is called The Amateur Firemen. I wonder what that one's about. So, and I wonder where the Russian gentleman's family have been all this time. Somewhere, obviously, and somewhere that the old gentleman's friends and people that he knows have been able to find them, which is great, possibly staying with some other Russians in London. Because they wouldn't have, if they've escaped from Russia, they probably didn't come with a lot of stuff, and so they would have been looked after by other people who were part of the Russian community in London at the time. Anyway, so I am going to finish now, and we will see you next time, if you can make it here. Don't forget to join our Discord server and follow me here, because if you follow me here on Twitch, you'll be notified when I'm online. And also go and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can catch up on stories that you have missed, or parts of stories that you have missed. So till next time, bye.